3 hours I drove, heart raw, chasing the ghost of my wife in our Muskoka cabin, the only place her laughter still echoes. But as I stepped onto the porch, my world shattered. My son, sprawled in my chair, a Molson dangling from his hand, sneered like a thief who'd already cashed the check. His wife and her parents lounged, their smug chuckles stabbing my chest. "You're done here," he spat, voice like a blade. "This cabin's theirs now." My hands shook, grief and rage boiling over, the pain of losing her again tearing me apart. They dared to steal my sanctuary? If this betrayal burns you, smash that like button and comment where you're watching from. I stood there, Lake Rousseau's red sunset mocking my ruin, and swore they'd pay for this. Here's how I fought back. The Muskoka air hit me like a punch, sharp with pine and the faint tang of lake water, but it couldn't drown out the venom of my son's words still ringing in my ears. This cabin, our cabin, wasn't just wood and nails. It was the last piece of Laura, my wife, who fought cancer for 3 years before it took her. I'm Michael Bennett, a 62-year-old Canadian Forces sergeant who carried shrapnel scars from Afghanistan and a heart stitched together by this place. Laura and I built it 20 years ago, 200 kilometers north of Toronto, to escape the nightmares that followed me home. Every summer, we'd sit on the dock, her hand in mine, counting loons as they sliced through Lake Rousseau's mirror-flat surface. The cedar table inside, I carved it with my own hands, sanding it smooth while Laura quilted by the fire, her laughter warming the room. This was our sanctuary, where I learned to breathe again after the war, where we raised Ethan, teaching him to fish, to respect the land. Now, Ethan, 32 and hardened by a world I don't recognize, sat there like he owned it, his wife Chloe Lefebvre perched beside him, her eyes flicking over the cabin like it was a prize she'd already claimed. Her parents, Elaine and Victor Gagnon, acted like they'd been handed the keys to a Muskoka estate, not my blood and sweat. Elaine set her coffee mug on my cedar table, no coaster, no care, leaving a wet ring that felt like a slap. Victor gave me a nod, the kind you'd toss to a delivery driver. "Nice place, Mike," he said, his voice dripping with fake gratitude. "You must be proud." "Proud?" I said, my voice low, steady, like I was briefing troops before a mission. "This is Laura's place, mine, not yours." Ethan leaned forward, his Molson bottle glinting in the fading light. "Come on, Dad, you're barely here. It's just sitting empty." "Empty? I'd been here 2 weeks ago, fixing the dock's loose boards, the ones Ethan never bothered to touch. I'd rebuilt the porch railing last month, my hands calloused from the work. This cabin wasn't empty, it was full of her, of us. My chest tightened, the pain of losing Laura flaring like a wound reopened. Ethan's betrayal wasn't just about the cabin. It was about erasing everything we built together. I stood there, the lake's calm mocking my fury. Knowing this fight was just beginning, the Muskoka dusk settled heavy, the lake's surface catching the last of the red light like a wound that wouldn't close. I stood on the porch of my cabin, my boots rooted to the cedar planks Laura and I laid down 20 years ago, my pulse hammering like a war drum. Ethan's words, "This cabin's theirs now," cut deeper than any shrapnel I took in Afghanistan. I stared at him, my son, lounging in my chair like he'd already rewritten our history. Chloe, his wife, sat close, her manicured fingers tracing the rim of a wine glass, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. Elaine and Victor Gagnon, her parents, radiated the smug confidence of people who thought they'd won without firing a shot. Elaine's coffee mug sat on my cedar table, its wet ring a deliberate insult to Laura's memory. Victor leaned back, his loafers propped on the railing I'd sanded smooth last month, and gave me that patronizing nod again. "We appreciate you stepping aside, Mike," he said, his voice thick with false warmth, like a politician at a town hall. "Stepping aside?" I said, my voice low, honed to the edge I used when dressing down a recruit. "This is my home, Laura's home. You don't get to claim it because you decided it's convenient." Ethan set his Molson down with a clink, his eyes narrowing. No trace of the boy who once begged me to teach him how to cast a line off the dock. "Dad, let's be real," he said. "You're 62, alone, rattling around Toronto in that empty condo. The Gagnons need this place. They're family now." Family? The word twisted in my gut like a bayonet. I'd spent 30 years in the Canadian Forces, carried the weight of Kandahar's dust and blood, built this cabin with Laura to keep our family whole. And now Ethan, the son I'd raised, was handing it to strangers who didn't know the first thing about what it cost us. Chloe leaned forward, her voice smooth as the lake but cold as its depths. "It's practical, Michael. Elaine and Victor are retired, struggling. You're barely here maybe once a month. Why let 200 square meters of prime Muskoka real estate sit empty?" Empty? I'd been here 2 weeks ago, tightening the dock's bolts under a July sun, the loons calling like they were mourning Laura with me. I'd repainted the porch in June, my hands sticky with paint, every stroke a promise to her memory. "Empty?" I said, my voice rising despite myself. "I built this place board by board. Every nail's got my sweat in it. You think you can just decide it's not mine?" Elaine shifted, her pearl necklace catching the fading light. "We're not trying to take anything, Michael," she said, her tone the kind of polite that hides a knife. "We're just making it a home again. For us," Victor chimed in, his smile as fake as a tourist shop totem. "We've got big plans, new deck, maybe a hot tub, make it a proper retreat." A hot tub? On the dock where Laura and I watch the stars? My vision blurred, not from tears but from the kind of rage that makes a man want to tear down walls. I glanced inside, past the open door. Laura's quilt, the one she'd stitched during chemo, draped over the couch. Chloe's purse sat on it, careless, like it was just another piece of furniture. "Plans?" I said, turning back to Ethan. "You're sitting in my chair, drinking my beer, on my porch, telling me about your plans?" Ethan didn't flinch. "It's done, Dad," he said, his voice flat, final. "They're moving in this weekend. You should go." Go? From the place where Laura's laughter still hung in the air, where I could still feel her hand on my shoulder when the nightmares came? My knuckles whitened around the strap of my bag, the leather creaking under my grip. Chloe sipped her wine, her eyes flicking to Ethan with a faint smirk, like they'd already won. Elaine adjusted her scarf, settling in like she was staging a photo for a real estate ad. Victor poured himself another glass, the wine glugging like a taunt. I took a step closer, my shadow falling across the porch. "You think you can erase me from this place?" I said, my voice a low growl, the kind I hadn't used since the war. "You're not just taking a cabin, you're taking her." Ethan's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close enough to make my blood boil. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Dad," he said. "Just let it go." Let it go? I'd let go of enough my youth to the army, my peace to the war, my wife to a disease that didn't care. I wasn't letting go of this. The lake stretched out behind them, calm and cruel, its silence amplifying the betrayal. I turned, my boots heavy on the steps, and walked back to my truck. Their voices followed me, Ethan's laugh, Chloe's murmur, Elaine asking about the wine's vintage. I slammed the door, the engine roaring to life. As I pulled away, the pines closed in, their scent sharp with the promise of a storm. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The truck's engine growled as I pulled away from the Muskoka cabin, the gravel crunching under the tires like bones underfoot. Lake Rosseau faded in the rear view, its calm surface a cruel mirror to the storm tearing through me. My hands gripped the wheel, knuckles pale, as Ethan's words, "You should go," clawed at my chest. 3 hours back to Toronto, 200 kilometers of pine and asphalt, and every kilometer felt like a betrayal deeper than the last. This wasn't just about a cabin. It was about Laura, my wife, whose laughter once filled those cedar walls, whose fight against cancer ended 5 years ago, leaving me to carry her memory alone. I built that place with her, board by board, to heal the scars Afghanistan left on my soul. Now, my own son had ripped it away, handing it to strangers who didn't know her name. I pulled into my Toronto condo at 10 p.m., the city's neon glow cold against the dark windows. The porch light flickered, a habit Laura insisted on. A home should never greet you in darkness, she'd said. But tonight, darkness was all I felt. I dropped my bag in the hall, the thud echoing in the empty space. In the kitchen, I poured coffee, black and bitter, into a chipped mug Laura loved, one she'd picked up at a Muskoka flea market. I carried it to my study, sat in the leather chair worn to my shape, and stared at a photo on the desk. Laura, on the cabin's dock, her hair catching the July sun, smiling like she knew something I didn't. My fingers traced the frame, and the pain hit a raw, jagged thing, like shrapnel lodged too deep to pull out. Ethan wasn't just stealing a cabin, he was stealing her, erasing every moment we'd carved into that place. For years, I'd given him everything. When his car broke down after university, I wrote a check for a new one, $30,000, no questions asked. When he and Chloe married, I paid for the wedding, the venue overlooking Lake Ontario, the open bar that kept them dancing. When they needed a deposit for their downtown condo, I handed over $50,000, thinking it was what fathers do. Each time I told myself it was for Laura, to keep our family whole. But Ethan's thank yous grew shorter, his calls fewer, until today, when he sat in my chair and told me I didn't belong. "You're alone now," he'd said, like my life was a sentence served, like Laura's absence gave him the right to rewrite our story. My phone buzzed, cutting through the silence. A text from Ethan. "We're moving them in this weekend. Don't come back." No apology, no hesitation, just a cold line drawn in the sand. I read it again, the words blurring as my vision swam. "Don't come back." To the place where Laura taught Ethan to skip stones, where we sat by the fire during chemo, her hand weak but warm in mine. I set the phone down, face down, like it could bury the truth. The condo was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ribs. I'd spent 5 years being the father who said yes, who gave and gave, thinking it would keep Ethan close, keep Laura's memory alive through him. But families don't work that way. They don't take your home, your heart, and call it theirs. I leaned back, the chair creaking under me, and closed my eyes. The nightmares from Kandahar used to wake me, but this was worse, a waking nightmare, where my son became the enemy. My coffee went cold, untouched. Outside, Toronto's skyline glittered, indifferent, its lights like stars that didn't care who watched them. I thought of Laura's quilt, still draped over the couch, Chloe's purse tossed on it like trash. I thought of Victor's loafers on my railing, Elaine's mug scarring my table, and Ethan, my boy, looking at me like I was already gone. The pain wasn't just loss, it was the weight of knowing I'd let it come to this. But beneath that weight, something stirred. Not anger, not yet. Something harder, colder, like the steel of a rifle I hadn't held in years. I picked up a pen, opened a notebook, and wrote one line. "They'll wish they never stepped foot in my home." The Toronto dawn broke gray, a heavy sky pressing down on my condo like it knew the weight in my chest. I hadn't slept, not after Ethan's text, "Don't come back," had burned itself into my mind. The chipped Muskoka flea market mug sat cold on my desk, Laura's favorite, mocking me with its silence. 5 years after her death, I'd clung to our cabin on Lake Rousseau, 200 kilometers north, as the last anchor to her memory. But Ethan, my own son, had tried to cut that line, handing my sanctuary to Chloe Lefebvre's parents, Elaine and Victor Gagnon, like it was theirs to claim. Their smug faces Elaine's coffee ring on my cedar table. Victor's loafers on my railing flashed in my head, each image a spark to the fire now building inside me. I wasn't the broken soldier anymore. I was done bending. By 6 a.m., I was on the phone with Lucas Reed, my old Canadian Forces buddy from Barrie, 100 kilometers up Highway 400. Lucas and I had survived Kandahar together, his tech skills keeping our comms alive under fire. Now, he ran a home automation business, wiring houses with systems smarter than most generals. "Mike, what's the mission?" he asked, his voice steady, like we were back in the desert. "My son's trying to give my cabin to his in-laws," I said, my tone flat but sharp, like a blade being whetted. "They're moving in this weekend. I need that place to fight back." Lucas let out a low whistle, the kind he used when a plan was about to get wild. "You want a haunted house or a fortress?" he said. "Fortress," I replied. "I want them running." We met at his Barrie workshop by 8 a.m., a cluttered cave of wires, monitors, and circuit boards that smelled of solder and coffee. Lucas spread a blueprint of my cabin on a table, his finger tracing the layout: living room, kitchen, dockside porch. "Here's the play," he said, eyes glinting like he was rigging an ambush. Motion sensors in every room, wired to strobe lights that'd pulse red and blue, disorienting as a flashbang. Hidden speakers in vents, programmed to whisper eerie warnings. Leave this place mixed with creaking footsteps and distant loons, the kind that'd make your skin crawl at midnight. Sprinklers tied to the plumbing, set to douse the interior on command, turning their cozy takeover into a soaking mess. And the kicker, a biometric lock, coded to my fingerprint alone, sealing the front door until I said otherwise. "This is legal, right?" I asked, my voice steady but tested. Lucas grinned, tossing a sensor onto the pile. "Smart home tech, Mike. Just creatively deployed." I leaned over the blueprint, my finger tapping the dock where Laura and I used to sit. "Can you add a voice assistant?" I said. "Something that calls them out by name?" Lucas's grin widened. "Oh, that's cold. I like it." He sketched a system to broadcast, "Ethan, you don't belong here," through the living room, personal and unnerving. We'd hide cameras, too, feeding live to my phone, so I could watch from Toronto as their arrogance crumbled. "How long?" I asked. 2 days, Lucas said. "We'll drive up tomorrow, wire the place before they show." I nodded, my jaw tight. This wasn't just about keeping the cabin. It was about showing Ethan, Chloe, and the Gagnons that you don't steal a man's home and walk away clean. Back in my condo that evening, I sat at my desk, the notebook open to the line I'd written, "They'll wish they never stepped foot in my home." I added another, "This ends on my terms." The pain of Ethan's betrayal still cut, deep as the shrapnel scars on my leg, but it was sharpening into something else: resolve, cold and unyielding, like the steel of my old service rifle. Laura's photo watched me, her smile steady, like she was nodding me forward. I'd spent years giving Ethan everything: cars, weddings, condos, thinking it'd keep us close. But he'd crossed a line, and I was done being the father who said yes. The cabin wasn't just wood and water, it was Laura's laugh, my peace, our life. And I'd be damned if I let them take it. Tomorrow, Lucas and I would turn that place into a trap, and by the weekend, they'd learn what happens when you push a soldier too far. Saturday afternoon, 2 p.m., the Muskoka sun hung low, painting Lake Rousseau a molten gold that felt like a mockery of the storm I was about to unleash. From my Toronto condo, 200 kilometers south, I sat in my study, the tablet screen glowing with live feeds from the cabin's hidden cameras. The blueprint Lucas Reed and I had wired was ready motion sensors, strobe lights, speakers, sprinklers, and a biometric lock, all set to turn my sanctuary into a trap. Ethan, Chloe, Elaine, and Victor thought they'd claimed my home, Laura's home. They were about to learn what happens when you cross a soldier who's done playing nice. The driveway camera flickered as Ethan's black SUV rolled in, gravel crunching like a warning shot. He stepped out, confident, a Molson bottle already in hand, his smirk as sharp as the one he'd worn when he told me to leave. Chloe followed, her purse slung over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the cabin like a realtor sizing up a listing. Elaine and Victor trailed, lugging suitcases, their faces lit with the smug certainty of people who thought they'd won. "Nice to be home," Victor said, his voice carrying through the porch mic, dripping with entitlement. Elaine laughed, adjusting her scarf. "This place'll look better with a hot tub." My jaw tightened, the memory of Laura's quilt under Chloe's purse flashing like a wound. They climbed the steps, Ethan unlocking the door with a stolen key, oblivious to the steel sign Lucas had bolted to the frame. "Private property. Enter at your own risk." I let them settle, watching as they crossed the threshold into the living room. Chloe tossed her purse onto Laura's couch. Elaine set her coffee mug again, no coaster on my cedar table, and Victor kicked off his loafers, propping his feet on an ottoman. Ethan fiddled with the thermostat, muttering about the chill. They moved with the ease of thieves who thought the job was done. At 2:15 p.m., the cabin's sound profile flatlined perfect stillness. My finger hovered over the tablet's execute button. "You wanted my home," I whispered to the screen. "Let's see how you like it now." I tapped the icon. The cabin came alive like a beast woken from sleep. Strobe lights erupted, red and blue pulses slashing through the living room, disorienting as a Kandahar flare. Hidden speakers hissed to life, whispering, "Leave this place." The words layered with creaking footsteps and the eerie wail of a distant loon. Sprinklers roared, dousing the room in a cold spray, water pooling on the pine floor. The voice assistant kicked in, cold and commanding. "Ethan Clark, unauthorized occupant. Exit now." Ethan froze, his Molson slipping from his hand, shattering on the floor. "What the hell?" he shouted, spinning toward Chloe, who clutched her purse, her face pale. "Ethan, what's happening?" she yelled, her voice cracking as water soaked her hair. Elaine screamed, high and sharp. As a shadow, Lucas's projector trick slid across the wall, a tall figure that seemed to pace just out of sight. Victor stumbled over his suitcase, cursing as he yanked at the kitchen faucet, but the water kept coming, a relentless roar. "Turn it off!" he bellowed, his loafers squelching. The biometric lock held the front door shut for 30 seconds, just long enough to make them feel trapped. Chloe pounded on it, her composure gone. "This is insane, he's lost it." Ethan tugged at the handle, his face a mix of rage and panic. "Dad did this!" he shouted, as if I could hear him 200 kilometers away. The cameras caught every moment, Elaine clutching her scarf, Victor slipping in the wet, Chloe's mascara streaking. When the lock finally clicked, they spilled onto the porch, drenched, tripping over each other to reach the SUV. I leaned back in my chair, the tablet's feed showing their taillights vanish into the Muskoka pines. My heart beat steady, not with joy, but with the cold satisfaction of a mission executed. Laura's quilt, my cedar table, our dock, they were mine again. For now. Ethan thought he could erase me, but the cabin had spoken, and it wasn't done yet. If you're cheering for this comeback, smash that like button and comment what you'd do in my shoes. The fight wasn't over, but I'd just drawn first blood. Sunday morning, the Toronto skyline gleamed like polished steel, but my study was a battlefield of resolve. The tablet's feeds from the Muskoka cabin, 200 kilometers north, sat dark after yesterday's chaos. Ethan, Chloe, Elaine, and Victor fleeing the strobe lights, whispers, and gushing sprinklers of my trap. Their panicked faces, caught on camera, had given me a moment of cold triumph, but Ethan's arrogance wasn't broken. At 8 a.m., my phone lit up with his call, his voice a snarl from the speaker. "You think that stunt changes anything, Dad?" He spat. "We're suing you harassment, emotional distress, the works. That cabin's still ours." My jaw tightened, the same steel I'd felt in Kandahar when the odds were against me. "You'll regret that," I said, my voice calm as a sniper's breath, and hung up. Ethan thought this was a game of bluster. I was about to play my final card. By noon, I was in Sophie Tremblay's law office downtown, a fortress of glass and oak where every surface screamed precision. Sophie, a fellow Canadian Forces veteran who'd traded fatigues for a suit, had handled my contract since I bought the cabin with Laura. Her eyes, sharp as a bayonet, scanned the deed I'd brought. "They're moving in again tomorrow," I told her, my voice steady but laced with the pain of Ethan's betrayal. "I want the cabin out of their reach permanently." Sophie nodded, her pen tapping the desk like a metronome. "You've got options, Mike," she said, her Quebecois accent clipping the words. "The cleanest? Transfer the deed to a charity. Irrevocable. They can't touch it." I thought of Laura, her volunteer days at the Veterans Healing Retreat, a Muskoka-based charity for soldiers with PTSD. She'd loved their work, said it gave broken souls a place to breathe. "Do it," I said. "Give it to them. But I keep access." Sophie drafted the papers in 48 hours, faster than a supply drop in a war zone. The deed transfer named the Canadian Veterans Healing Retreat as the owner, with a clause granting me lifetime access to the cabin when it wasn't booked for programs. By Wednesday, the county recorder's stamp made it official untouchable. That afternoon, I called Ethan, Chloe, Elaine, and Victor to Sophie's office. They walked in like they still held the high ground. Ethan's jaw set, Chloe's arms crossed, Elaine clutching her scarf like a shield, Victor's loafers clicking with false confidence. "This ends now," Ethan said, his voice tight. "You can't scare us out with your tech tricks." Sophie slid a single page across the oak table, the county recorder's index, stark and final. "Clearview Cabin, Muskoka," she said, her tone cutting like a drill sergeant's. "Owner, Canadian Veterans Healing Retreat. As of 10 a.m. yesterday, the transfer is irrevocable." Ethan's face drained, pale as a Muskoka winter. "Irrevocable?" he stammered. "You gave it away?" Chloe's eyes flashed, her manicure digging into her palm. "You chose strangers over your son." I leaned forward, my voice low, steady, like I was calling in coordinates. "I chose people who know what sacrifice means, Ethan. Unlike you." Elaine's pearls trembled as she spoke, her voice small. "We just wanted a home." "You wanted my home," I said, my gaze pinning her. "You sat on my porch, scarred my table, and told me to leave. That's not family." Victor cleared his throat, his politician's smile gone. "We can still fight this," he said, but his voice wavered. Sophie tapped another document, a notice of no trespass. "Try it," she said. "Step foot in that cabin without Michael's written permission, and it's criminal trespass. Push further, and we'll bury you in court." Ethan stood, his chair scraping the floor, his eyes burning with something close to shame. "You'd rather give it to charity than me," he said, not a question. I'd rather honor Laura, I replied. You forgot how. They left in silence, Elaine's scarf trailing, Victor's loafers dragging. Sophie gathered the papers, her nod one of respect. You played this like a soldier, Mike, she said. I didn't smile. The cabin was safe, Laura's memory protected, but the cost was a son who might never understand. If this victory resonates, hit that like button and comment what you'd protect at all costs. The war was over, but the scars remained. The Muskoka air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth as I pulled into the gravel drive of the cabin on a quiet Wednesday morning, the 13th of August, 2025. Lake Rosseau shimmered under a pale sun, its surface unbroken except for the slow ripple of a loon's dive. The cabin, my sanctuary with Laura, stood silent, no longer wired with Lucas Reed's tech traps that had sent Ethan, Chloe, Elaine, and Victor running. The deed was now in the hands of the Canadian Veterans Healing Retreat, a gift to honor Laura's dream of healing broken souls. I'd won the war, but the victory felt heavy, like a metal pin to a chest still scarred from battle. I stepped onto the porch, my boots soft on the cedar planks I'd laid with her, and felt her presence in the quiet, a whisper of her laughter in the wind. Amelia Nguyen, the retreat's program director, waited by the dock, her clipboard tucked under her arm, her smile warm but professional. "Michael," she said, her voice steady like a medic's, "this place is going to change lives, just like it changed yours." I nodded, my throat tight. "It's what Laura would have wanted," I said, my words low, carrying the weight of 5 years without her. Amelia walked me through the cabin, pointing out where they'd set up bunks for veterans, a quiet room for counseling, a fire pit by the lake for late-night talks. "We're starting with 6 veterans next week," she said. "PTSD survivors, some with families. They'll find peace here, 200 kilometers from the noise of the world." I ran my hand over the cedar table, the one I'd carved, now free of Elaine's coffee rings. The quilt Laura stitched during chemo hung on the wall, a testament to her strength, no longer buried under Chloe's careless purse. I walked to the dock, the boards creaking under my weight, and sat where Laura and I used to count the loons. The lake stretched out, its calm a mirror to the peace settling in me. I'd fought for this place not just to keep it from Ethan's grasp, but to give it a purpose bigger than my pain. The Veterans Healing Retreat would use it to mend soldiers like me, men and women who'd carried war's weight too long. Amelia joined me, her boots soft on the dock. "You're welcome anytime, Michael," she said. "Your lifetime access is in the deed, just like Sophie wrote it." I nodded, my eyes on the water. "I'll come when it's quiet," I said, "when it's just me and her." My phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. "I'm sorry, Dad. I was wrong. Can we talk?" I stared at the words, my thumb hovering over the screen. The boy who'd sat in my chair, who'd handed my home to Victor and Elaine, was reaching out, but the wound was still raw. I'd given him everything: $30,000 for a car, $50,000 for a condo, a wedding that lit up Lake Ontario, and he'd repaid me with betrayal. But Laura's voice, soft as the Muskoka breeze, seemed to whisper, "Give him time." I slipped the phone into my pocket, not ready to reply. Not yet. Families don't heal overnight, not when they've been broken like this. Ethan would have to earn his way back, not with words, but with change. As I stood, the sun climbed higher, warming the dock's worn boards. The cabin behind me glowed, no longer just mine, but a beacon for those who needed it most. I thought of Laura, her smile in that July photo, and knew she'd be proud. This wasn't about winning, it was about honoring what we'd built, what we'd fought for. The loons called again, their cries weaving into the morning, a reminder that some things endure, even through pain. If this story moves you, Hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. The cabin had a new purpose, and so did I. The Muskoka dusk settled over Lake Rousseau, the water catching the last light like a quiet promise. I stood on the dock, coffee steaming in Laura's chipped flea market mug, the one she loved for its imperfections. The cabin behind me, now a haven for the Canadian veterans' healing retreat, glowed with new purpose, its cedar walls holding stories of soldiers finding peace 200 kilometers from Toronto's noise. I'd fought for this place against Ethan's betrayal, against Chloe, Elaine, and Victor's greed, and won by giving it away. Laura's quilt hung on the wall, her memory safe, not in my hands but in the laughter of veterans by the fire pit, their voices carrying across the lake like loons in the twilight. This wasn't just about a cabin. It was about drawing a line, about protecting what matters when the world tries to take it. As a soldier, I learned to fight for freedom, but the hardest battles are the ones you fight for your own heart. Ethan's text, "I'm sorry, Dad," sat unanswered in my pocket, a seed that might grow or wither. I'd given him cars, condos, a wedding, thinking it would keep us close, but love doesn't bend to theft. Veterans know this. You hold your ground, not out of anger, but to honor what you've lost. I gave the cabin to those who'd understand its weight, who'd sit on this dock and feel the scars of war ease, just as I had with Laura. Some battles you win by keeping what's yours. Others, you win by letting go for something bigger. If this story touched you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs it, a friend, a veteran, anyone who's had to fight for their peace. Drop a comment on our Maple Revenge channel. What line have you drawn to protect what matters? Subscribe to hear more stories of battles fought and won, not with fists, but with heart. I turned back to the lake, the loons calling, their cries weaving into the night. Laura's smile lingered in the air, and for the first time in years, I felt whole.